Hi there. Welcome to the debut episode of the Estranged Heart podcast. And happy Halloween. I'm your host, Kreed Revere, a formerly estranged and now reconciled mother of 2 adult children. Wow, the build-up and anticipation over the last few months has been filled with excitement and hope for this podcast. I am so grateful that you've chosen to listen in. If you have shared this podcast, thank you. The support for the Estranged Heart has been growing, and that is so welcomed as we work with intention and love to grow a community and support system to help others to feel less isolated. It's my hope that you'll join us each week as we build our curiosity muscles about the origins of estrangement, what to do when we're in the middle of the shitstorm called estrangement, and how to navigate life after estrangement and into reconciliation. If you like what you hear here, I would invite you to follow us, to leave a review of the podcast, drop us an email at theestrangedheart@gmail.com, or send us a voice message through anchor.fm. And as a side note, if you elect to send us a voice message, I'm the only one who gets that. So it's not like it just automatically posts to the podcast. No one else would hear it, and it would not be used on the podcast without your permission. Also, please share this podcast. If there's anything that I have learned through my own estrangement experience, it's that there are so many people who are walking this path that we would never, ever guess. So please share it far and wide. Thank you. As we begin this first episode, I have felt a strong calling to give some information on the background of the podcast, as well as background information on myself. These things will provide insight as to the mission and vision of this podcast, how I came to put it all together and where I see it going from here, and how I came to the perspective I have regarding estrangement and reconciliation. That's super important for you to understand future episodes, and when I speak on estrangement, where that's coming from. So, all that being said, let's begin. Oh, but before we get started, let's go over some housekeeping things and a disclaimer or two, because people, legalities. 1, I record these podcast episodes in my home in a city of 100,000 plus people located on the west coast of the United States. This means you may hear in the background things like lawn maintenance activity, children running and playing, dogs barking, sirens blaring, and knocks at the door. All evidence of life being lived. Number 2, my 2 retired racing greyhounds, Hollis and Gemma, graciously allow me to live in their home, and as such, are not the least bit concerned with a smooth and uninterrupted podcast recording. You are likely to hear them snoring, drinking water, collar and tags rattling at any given time, and on a rare occasion, a bark. Number 3, I embrace being messy. What does that have to do with this podcast, you ask? Well, you're likely to hear some ums, a few curse words along the way, prolonged silences, and a stumbling over words. And I'm not apt to edit those things out. I think it's important for the world at large to see us as we are, imperfect human beings. Number 4, I am not a therapist or counselor. Nothing within this podcast should be considered or taken as therapy or any therapeutic intervention. If you are in need of therapeutic support, such as counseling, please seek out a therapist near you. Number 5, I do not claim to be an expert on the subject of estrangement or reconciliation. What I do claim is my own estrangement and reconciliation experiences and story. This is something I can speak on confidently. Also, I have 3+ years of experience as a trained facilitator for support groups, both in person and online, for estranged mothers and grandmothers. The stories I have witnessed have provided me with an insight that few ever receive outside of their own experience or a therapy office. Now, on to the business of this podcast. Let's begin with a quote that reached out and grabbed me by the throat and heart. Some people teach us more about love the moment they walk away. R.M. Drake. The mission of the Estranged Heart podcast is to build community and lessen the isolation and shame that inherently comes with estrangement. It's important for me that I have and provide a space where estranged parents and estranged adult children have a space to feel safe expressing their grief, pain, insecurities, regrets, anger, as well as their joys, happiness, and wins, and to step out of the shame cycle that wreaks havoc on our self-esteem. The vision of the Estranged Heart is to shift hearts, transform relationships, and heal generations. So, how exactly did this podcast come to be? Well, for starters, people were asking for it. Maybe not in this particular format, but in some public way. And after several years of facilitating support groups, it became apparent that there was a growing need for new and different information, as well as new and different concrete steps on how to move through estrangement and into reconciliation, if at all possible. And if reconciliation was not an option, then in finding a way to move forward with life without our children in our lives. Also, I began to listen to estranged adult children, and this gave me an insight as to their reasons for estrangement, and from there I began to piece together some of the estrangement puzzle pieces. There were many, many, many iterations of this podcast before it became the Estranged Heart. One of those was, "Dear God, it's me again." And, "Dear God, where the hell are you?" Because that's how I felt most days in the middle of my estrangement experience. I started this podcast in part because my perspective and approach to estrangement and reconciliation was also not readily available, quote unquote, out there. While there was growing information at the ready by psychologists and mental health counselors, as well as a few estranged mothers, there seemed to be a lack of information from the view I held. As I mentioned before, over the years, I was approached time and again by estranged mothers and estranged adult children asking me to get my voice and perspective out there. So I decided to take the leap and began this podcast as a place where stories can be witnessed and shared through the lens of open-hearted curiosity, courageous vulnerability, compassion, and big, brave love. It should be noted that this podcast is not going to be for everyone. There are those individuals who believe I am not qualified to speak on this topic because I am not a mental health professional. Then there are those parents who are hell-bent on not exploring their contribution to the estrangement experience, are committed to remaining in the victim mindset, are not willing to see their adult daughter or son and their perspective on their life experiences, or are not willing to grow and change as a parent and human being. And those are the individuals with whom this podcast is apt to ruffle feathers for. If this is you, I encourage you to sit with that for some time, reflect on the emotions and feelings that come up for you, and work your way back to their origins, which is most likely something that you experienced in your own childhood that broke your heart. Please know that there are other avenues to find support and community that will fill the role you need for your specific estrangement experience support. It's important that you find one that will help you to feel supported in the unique way that you need. And I'll list a few of these later on the show notes for your reference. But the bottom line is that no one thing or person can be everything for everyone. So exactly what does qualify me to discuss estrangement and reconciliation? First, been there, done that. I have been estranged from both of my adult children, and I have reconciled with both of my adult children. I know all too well the immense heartache and pain of estrangement, and I know what it took for my adult children to want to be back in my life and to share their lives with me. Second, for nearly 4 years now, I have facilitated support groups for estranged mothers. I've been there through the ups and downs, the minefields, the joys, and the tears. And I have witnessed actions that work and actions that do not when it comes to healing estrangement and moving into reconciliation. And finally, I've committed myself to learn everything possible about estrangement. I have and will continue to listen to adult children to gain insight as to why they chose and continue to engage with estrangement. I also have read, watched, and listened to everything I can from mental health professionals as well as parenting experts, because I believe we never finish parenting our children. And I want to know more about where I went wrong so that moving forward, I can get it right. What is my perspective as it relates to estrangement and reconciliation, you ask? Well, I'll get into a bit more later, but for now, suffice it to say that I believe estrangement is two sides of the same coin for parents and adult children, and most often it is up to the parent to lead the way. And hey, I know how hard that is, but I also know that I am proof you can teach an old dog new tricks. The only thing required is a sense of curiosity, an open heart, and a willingness to do it messy. That means not getting it right the first time, or the second time, or the third time. It means leaning into the discomfort of the unknown. It means being willing to entertain the idea that you might not know it all after all. And it means demonstrating big, brave vulnerability and love by apologizing and not self-centering. I believe our children, adult or not, are here to wake us up, to help us to learn something new and different, to help us to grow as human beings, to help us to open our hearts and become more compassionate, to help us to learn to value differences, and to help us to rediscover ourselves. And most importantly, to help us to learn how to let go. I am forever saying, follow the children, for they know the way. Oh, it may not look like they know the way, but I assure you they do. We as parents have simply been conditioned to be the, quote, all-knowing ones, and to dismiss the wildly accurate GPS of subconscious behaviors of our children. I think it's important for you to know a bit about who I am as your host, and the reason for this is because the podcast speaks to my perspective on estrangement and reconciliation. And to understand that perspective, a bit of information as to who I am as a person will hopefully help you to further understand how and why my approaches are what they are. So exactly who am I? Well, first and foremost, I am a human being. That means I am imperfect. It means I don't always get things right. It means I make mistakes, and it means I am capable of hurting others unintentionally. I am a firstborn daughter, a big sister, a mother of 2 adult daughters, a Gigi, and that's code for grandmother, to 4 grandchildren, a surrogate mother of 2 sets of twins for 2 different families, a friend to a chosen few, and a mother hen to a gaggle of millennials at my day job. I am an extroverted introvert who can generally be found with my nose in some nonfiction book and on occasion a spicy romance novel or two, or taking some class to expand my knowledge and broaden my horizons and insights. I am naturally curious about what makes people tick, and I'm always searching for the connecting threads that stitch together the tapestry we call being a human being. I am adept at scoping out the stories held within each of our hearts as individuals, which reveal why we act the way we do. I fully embrace change. My friends often remind me they were so glad when we moved from the old-fashioned paper address books and pens to smartphones so they could more easily stay up to date with my ever-changing address. It boggles my mind when I meet people who have been in one home or in the same hometown for decades upon decades. It's just not who I am. I do not consider myself to be religious, although I swear I was a priest or pastor in another lifetime. Spirituality is my jam, and I enjoy mixing a little of this with a little of that until I have my perfect concoction for what ails my soul. That being said, I hold deep reverence for others and the sacredness of their chosen religious or spiritual beliefs. I tend to view life through the lens of pregnancy and birth. This could be in part because I have been pregnant 5 times. I have delivered 2 children of my own, 4 children that were not mine, had 1 miscarriage, was a labor and birth doula for over a decade, and most recently a doula, aka spiritual midwife. Because of those experiences, I find value in the unseen and unknown, in timing, and in hurt and pain, as well as deep, deep love. And finally, I am a staunch advocate for therapy and encourage every parent and adult child to get into counseling. As a therapy client myself, with friends who are therapists and working with 25 therapists every day in my day job, I know the parameters, legalities, and ethics regarding counseling others. It's also a field of study for me as I return to college next year to study psychology and become a mental health counselor myself. Therapy changed my life and was a big, big key in helping me to reconcile with my daughters. And I will also say that I attended therapy regarding estrangement. My adult children did not. At the age of 52, I am also in between the ages of most estranged parents and their adult children, which I think affords me a unique perspective, the ability to understand much of what an estranged parent experiences, as well as that of the estranged adult child. Also, I have personally been on both sides of the estrangement coin, as an adult child and as a parent. While I was never estranged from my own mom for any great deal of time, there were a couple of short bouts when I was in my 20s and was a young mom myself. But enough about me. You came here to hear more about estrangement and reconciliation, so let's get on with it. Estrangement is a 12-letter word packed full of all sorts of things that elicit a host of feelings and emotions. So let's get some general information and figure out exactly what does estrangement mean. The dictionary defines estrangement as the fact of no longer being on friendly terms or part of a social group. Wikipedia defines family estrangements as the loss of a previously existing relationship between family members through physical and or emotional distancing, often to the extent that there is no communication between the individuals involved for a prolonged period of time. Recently, in July of 2021, I read an article that listed the parent-adult-child estrangement in the United States at 27% at least. I'd venture to say that this is a very low and conservative estimate. Due to the shame and isolation involved with estrangement, it's not something people bring up with their friends and acquaintances. And as I referenced earlier, it's just not something people are open about. They keep it hidden, keep it locked inside, isolate themselves, and therefore I feel like we really do not have a good number of the of the actual estrangements that are occurring today. Dr. Joshua Coleman, a clinical psychologist located in California and author of The Rules of Estrangement, states some of the following reasons why adult children estrange from their parents: emotional, physical, and sexual abuse in childhood, toxic behaviors such as disrespect or hurtfulness, feeling unsupported, and clash in values. Parents, on the other hand, are more likely to blame the estrangement on their divorce, the child's spouse, or what they perceive as the child's entitlement. As you can see, very different, very, very, very different perspectives on estrangement from the estranged parent and the estranged adult child. As a formerly estranged and now reconciled mother, who has been gathering real-life stories and such from both parents and adult children, it's my belief that while there are many truths to which Dr. Coleman speaks, there is also something much more simple that leads to and continues estrangement. And that is the refusal or inability to see and validate another person's truth. And by truth, I mean their experience. There will be more to come on this in future episodes, but for now, let me share a bit about my own estrangement experience. My estrangement experience began almost 6 years ago, and episode number 2 will be all about my own particular estrangement experience, so I urge you to tune in and listen to that. In the meantime, I'll give a cursory overview of what I went through and how I have ended up where I am today. First of all, there was, with my estrangement experience, there was no parental alienation or the quote-unquote gatekeeper reasons for my estrangement experience. The way I parented and treated my children as children and young adults are the reasons why my estrangement happened. I didn't believe that in the beginning, but later came to that realization. Funny thing is, most estranged mothers tell me, "Oh, that wasn't me. I never did or said things like that to my children." And they say it with this condescending tone. Yet, what they fail to see is that many of them actually do and say those things today about their adult sons and daughters. When my estrangement happened with my both of my daughters, it seemingly occurred out of the blue, and I hear this often from estranged mothers, it was like someone flipped a switch. It just happened overnight. And I thought the same thing too when mine first happened. I had gone through a pretty rough time personally. I was going through a separation of a relationship. I was pretty stressed out with work and kind of wrapped up in my own world. And so I didn't see the signs happening, that estrangement was lurking around the corner. So both of my girls estranged from me, and that estrangement lasted with one daughter just shy of a year, with another daughter just shy of 2 years. And we've been reconciled now for 3 or 4 years, 3 years now or so, 4 years. And while we're on the other side of estrangement, it's still ever present for me. It's not something that I take for granted. I know at any given point in time that I could find myself back in estrangement with my girls, and that's a whole nother matter and something that I'll discuss in episode 2. I can say that when my estrangement occurred, I was in therapy for other reasons, and when the estrangement happened, I transitioned that therapy into trying to find out more about my estrangement. And that meant that when it first happened, I mean, I was traumatized. I was lost. I didn't understand what had happened, why it had happened, how to move out of it, move through it, whatever the case may be. And so I started just working on all of those feelings and emotions with my therapist. And I'm here to tell you the first several therapy sessions, I was angry. I was either sobbing or cursing. It seemed that there was no in between. And I was able to eventually come out of that, processing the grief and things that I was experiencing. And I was able to have my own hurts witnessed by my therapist, which then allowed me to be able to begin to see things from the perspective of my adult children. And there were times in the beginning that I was, I said, I'm not changing anything. If they want something different, they will have to change. I've done nothing wrong. I was on what I call my high horse, and busy pointing the finger at them until I realized, in a way that was not a good feeling, that I had a part to play in the estrangement. And it was in realizing that and recognizing that and working through that in therapy, being able to explore, what did that mean? How did that make me feel? And all of the thoughts and emotions and feelings that come up with that. But eventually it led me to be able to try to see things through the lens of which my children were looking through things. And learning some self-compassion and grace for myself, I was also able to extend that to my children. And that is what really played the significant role in helping us to reconcile. I will tell you that on the other side of reconciliation, I hear oftentimes parents are just, I just wish things would go back to the way they were. I can't wait till we reconcile and we can quote unquote get back to normal and things like that. I'm here to tell you my experience. My relationship with my daughters did not go back to normal. And thank goodness, because what we had before our estrangement experience was not healthy. It was not good. And I can see that now. I could not see it when I was in it. I couldn't see it even in the, in the estrangement when it first happened, but I can see that now. And I am so very grateful that things did not, quote unquote, go back to normal, because our normal was toxic. It was not good. It was not healthy for them or for me. And so, on the other side of estrangement, things look very different, when you get into reconciliation. And there was, and still is, to a certain extent, a walking on eggshells, so to speak. It's better now that I'm several years out from the beginning of our reconciliation. However, it is still very present. So I say all of this to say this. I understand your pain. Whether you're an adult parent, you're an estranged parent or an estranged adult son or daughter. I understand your pain. I have been in all of those shoes. And it hurts. And you feel alone. And you feel like tomorrow may never come with happiness again. And I'd like to urge you to open your heart to just entertain the question of what if it could be happy? What if it could be happy? And not based on the actions of others, but what if I could be happy? When we can look within, when we can tend to our own tender and broken hearts, we learn by doing that how to give that same thing to others, and that includes our children. So I urge you to continue to listen in to our podcast. We will have interviews with estranged parents, formerly estranged parents, with estranged adult children, formerly estranged adult children, with mental health professionals, and I hope that they will help you to lead you home first and foremost, back to your own heart, and then back to your children. I do want to let you know of some folks who have influenced me in my perspective now on estrangement and reconciliation. These are people that I followed. For many of them, I followed pre-estrangement, but really began to look at their messages and such post-estrangement and how it applied and could be applied to estrangement and reconciliation. And the first person who influenced me greatly is Dr. Gabor Mate. He's a Hungarian-Canadian family physician who is an expert in trauma, addiction, stress, and childhood development. He is a husband and father of 2 adult sons, and I think it's important to note here that Dr. Mate is nearing his 78th birthday. He will be 78 in January of 2022. So he is of the older generation, and he has just a wealth of knowledge and information and compassion for children and for parents. A quote from him that I remind myself of often is, "Parenting is not a role. The most important thing is relationship. Without understanding relationship, any plan of action will only breed conflict." The second person is Brené Brown. She is a research professor who studies shame and vulnerability and empathy. She's also an author of 5 New York Times bestselling books, and she's a wife to a pediatrician and mom of 2 children. Her motto, her life motto is courage over comfort. And a quote from her is, "I believe that you have to walk through vulnerability to get to courage. Therefore, embrace the suck." And she just talks about how it just sucks to have to go through some of that stuff and experience those things, but we have to embrace the suck. The next person is Dr. Shefali Tisbury. She's a clinical psychologist and author of the books The Conscious Parent, The Awakened Family, and A Radical Awakening. She's a mom to 1 daughter, and to quote her, "The conditions of childhood did not define us. I learned that breaking free from the past and entering the present moment to live in the here and now is the most important journey we can take." Another person is Tina Gilbertson. She is a psychotherapist and host of the Reconnecting podcast and author of 2 books, Reconnecting with Your Estranged Adult Child and Constructive, Wallowing. And to quote Tina, "Forgiving someone who hurts you and shows no remorse is neither necessary nor healthier for you than continuing to feel however you feel about it. It's not that you're drinking the poison, it's that you've been poisoned, and there's a big difference." The next person is Dr. Joshua Coleman, a clinical psychologist and author of the book Rules for Estrangement. And a quote from him is, "Don't get into the rightness or wrongness of it. Seek to understand." And finally, there's another podcast that talks and speaks on estrangement, and that is When the Bow Breaks. It's hosted by Alexis Erlin. She's a podcaster who realizes one important step towards healing and recovery is vulnerability. So in our upcoming episodes, I want you to know a few of the things that we'll explore and talk about. In addition to these folks who have influenced me, you'll also hear things from each of them, maybe not in person, but through their materials that they have made available. But also, Esther Perel, who is a psychotherapist who specializes in relationships. She's based out of New York City, and while she specializes in couples and couples therapy, I have come to know much of her take on relationships for couples can also be used for parents and children, and adult children. And because basically when it's all boiled down, we're all talking about relationships. So she's a wealth of information as well. But we'll also talk about ambiguous loss and grief, and how that grieving process is different than what we traditionally think of as grief and loss. We'll also talk about the death of dreams and the dreams that we had, either as a parent for our relationship with our children, and or the relationship or the for our children. What were our dreams for our children, right? As well as the death of dreams as an adult child who is estranged from your parent, and the dreams that you had for your relationship with your parent. So we'll talk about that as well. We'll also talk about radical acceptance, the power of being in the here and now, and what that means, and how to find that, how to get to that place and point in life. We'll also talk about validation. Huge piece. Validation is key, in my opinion, and is what helped me to reconcile with my children. We'll also talk about enmeshment and codependency. I see this so often. It was very much a part of my relationship with my children, and I did not see that until I got myself into therapy. And looking back on it now, I see it in so many relationships with parents and children. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll also talk about trauma and what trauma is, and understanding that trauma doesn't always have to be the big T traumas that we think of, like war and genocide and things like that, but can be the little T traumas that happen to us every day. And I'm here to tell you, if you have been estranged, are estranged, in the middle of estrangement, what have you, that's trauma. It's a little T trauma. So we'll talk more about that as well. We'll also throw in some scientific things, and we'll talk about epigenetics and then the role that plays in estrangement. And on top of all of that, I welcome your input. If there is a topic that I haven't covered, you haven't heard me talk about or reference at any point in time that you want covered, please let me know. I'm happy to do that for you. And if I don't have the answer, don't know the answer, don't understand it, I will certainly find it for you, or be able to reference someone else who can provide that information for you. So I think that brings this debut episode to a close. I hope that this time together today you feel was well spent, and I hope that you will tune in each Sunday for each new episode as it's released. And if you are an estranged parent or an estranged adult child and would like to share your story, please feel free to reach out to me at theestrangedheart@gmail.com, or leave a voice message through anchor.fm as well. I'm happy to share your story, either by having you as a guest on the show, or just sharing your story through storytelling if you're not comfortable being a guest. And also know that you can always remain anonymous either way. So thank you again. I am super grateful for you having taken time out of your day today to spend with me, and I hope that you'll return and listen to the next episode of the Estranged Heart podcast. Until then.